What is going on, everyone? Welcome into our next divisional draft grades video, where we're going to be taking a look back at the draft, talking about who maximized the picks that they had, maybe who stole some really great players, maybe perhaps based on my own evaluations who reached a little bit, or maybe passed on who I think will be better options at the next level. But ultimately just taking a look as well at who these players are, how they fit in with their new teams, and what I think they might be at the next level. I do encourage you to take a look in the description below. I have a new grading criteria for this, really trying to amp up the consistency and transparency with how I come up with these grades. While you're down there, if you could throw a like on the video, I really appreciate it. It takes just a second. It's a meaningful way to support my channel. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these draft grades videos. And next up, we have my deep dive series coming in just a few weeks. Going to work throughout the entire summer, previewing every NFL team in depth. I think it's the best thing I have to offer on this channel. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure you're subscribed, and let's get into it. And then I do want to add, I have been listening to some feedback over the last couple episodes. I have tweaked some of the day 3 grading stuff. Instead of blue coding the solid picks, those are actually now going to be white coded to just truly indicate the neutral nature of my opinion of those picks. But I also wanted to add some context to those picks as far as like what kind of role and what the sort of thought process on taking that player probably was. And then I've also added a new tier in that day 3 category of a good pick, which is basically the same criteria as a solid pick, but maybe an even better, like, amped up landing spot to the point where I could, like, I feel a little bit more confident to say this guy's going to work out there. And then everything else is pretty much the same there. But anyway, let's get into it with the Denver Broncos kicking off this AFC West episode, and only 5 picks here, none in the first round. They start things off taking Marvin Mims. I'm going to be honest, it was just a little bit early for me. I had him as a true third-round guy. I like Marvin Mims. He has really excellent highlight reel catches. He's got good deep speed, good body control. To me, if you're drafting a guy in the second round, though, I either want that guy that I feel pretty good that he can step in and be a part of your wide receiver group as far as a starting conglomerate is concerned right away. And I don't feel that confident in Marvin Mims to do that. I think if he's going to play from the slot or from the outside, I just think as far as his ability to truly separate at the next level, it's going to have to take a little bit of time to get there. I don't think his routes showed the most polish. He didn't run the most diverse route tree at Oklahoma, and he's a little bit more slender and struggles to deal with some of that physical contact, whether that's at the line of scrimmage in his release or down the field against the more grabby physical corners that he's going to face at the next level. So I'm not saying this is a bad pick. I think in time he can turn into a starter for them. But I'm also not going to pound the table and say this was some amazing pick either. Unlike what I'm going to do for getting Drew Sanders at the top of the 3rd round. I thought for sure Drew Sanders was going to be viewed by the NFL as that, top end developmental linebacker, and he was viewed as one of the top linebackers in this draft. We didn't see one drafted in the 2nd round, which makes Detroit's 1st round pick of Jack Campbell even more curious, but Drew Sanders is the 2nd linebacker off the board, and to me, he was right in that cluster with Jack Campbell and with Diane Henley, and to get him in the 3rd round, a guy that I think can be a really impactful coverage linebacker at the next level, but someone that needed time to kind of sit for a year and work his way up and play better run defense. I think he can add about 5 to 8 functional pounds of muscle to his frame as well. I would have been worried if he went to a team early in the top 35, 40 picks and had to start right away. Here, I like him so much better because, just go back to what I said about Dorian Williams to Buffalo, or what I've said about developmental linebackers for years now, where I actually prefer to get a guy where he has to prove to the coaching staff that he can play instead of just getting handed that starting job. I think it forces that drive and work ethic to really develop the many difficult tasks that the linebacker position is asked to do. Don't bite on play action. Defend the run from nickel packages without an extra nose tackle in there to help you, deal with RPOs. Like, good freaking luck. I really like how Drew Sanders is going to come in as a backup. They got a pair of starters there, but in a year, he really could end up being the best linebacker in this class. And to get him in the 3rd round, I mean, the Broncos are stealing value left and right. They got a 1st-round pick for Bradley Chubb somehow. They get a guy in the 3rd round here that I think you could have justified at the back end of the 1st round. I really thought the Buffalo Bills might have been in on this guy in the 1st round. So I think this is an exceptional pick for the Broncos. And then they take Riley Moss in the middle of the 3rd round. Kind of similar to Marvin Mims. Like, I don't have any real issues with him as a player. I think this was just a touch early. I think there were some better options that they probably could have gone with. But I do like Moss. He's a really smart zone corner with really fluid athletic ability. He's got good speed. I won't be surprised if he eventually turns into a starter for them. I'm not trying to slam this pick either. It does get a B from me. And then you get to day 3. I did think J.L. Skinner was a bit of a steal in the 6th round. I understand why he fell, because he's coming off the injury. I think it was a torn pec at a workout in February. So his ability to kind of be there for camp and compete for a job right away was always going to be limited. And he might be a guy that sits on IR all year. I don't know off the top of my head the full duration of a torn pec, but I do like how he fits. The Broncos have been looking for that number 2 safety ever since Kareem Jackson has become an old man, basically. And I like Caden Stearns. I think J.L. Skinner is a very similar caliber prospect to what Caden Stearns was. He's got good long striding speed as a free safety. He's got the size to come down in the box. And between J.L. Skinner maybe getting healthy in time and Caden Stearns, I think they can find a safety for this system. And I like it too, because Vance Joseph doesn't really run a ton of the quarters stuff where you need a lot of that hip flexibility and, kind of those slot cornerback skills to be able to turn and run and cover slot receivers from quarters. He's going to have more of a free safety, strong safety, north and south relationship with these safeties. And I think J.L. Skinner fits that very well. So if he gets back healthy and is competing with Caden Stearns for a starting job by the end of the year or into 2024, I wouldn't be surprised. And that's great value in the 6th round. And then they take Alex Forsythe, who we think is going to be a backup center at the very end of the draft. So solid pick there. Overall, I'm going to give this draft a B+. I really love getting Drew Sanders. I think that is sniping value for a team that didn't have any high draft picks. Mims and Moss, if one of those two could turn into a starter at wide receiver or corner, you're going to walk away pretty happy. I don't think either of those are guaranteed, but you got a chance there. And then J.L. Skinner in that mix as well. So for what they had, I think Denver did a very good job. This show is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy football. The moment this draft is complete, Best Ball Mania 4 goes live, and it is the biggest fantasy football competition of all time. Not even kidding. It's only $25 to enter for your shot at $15 million in total prizes and a first place prize of $3 million. You won't want to miss out on this action. The best part is, because it's best ball format, all you have to do is draft your teams, which you can do at home on your phone thanks to the amazing Underdog app. In Best Ball Mania, you join the tournament, draft your team as you would in any normal fantasy football league, and your lineup is locked in once the draft is complete. No waivers, no trades. That's right, it is set it and forget it until it's time to collect your cash. Underdog automatically optimizes your lineup weekly to create the highest scoring option. What are you waiting for? Get signed up at UnderdogFantasy.com or via the App Store with promo code TFG, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code TFG for your shot at $15 million inside Best Ball Mania 4. And then we get to Kansas City, and look, I get it, man. Brett Veach is a brilliant general manager. I loved their draft last year. I am afraid of questioning the man. I will just say that. But if I'm being honest, this was one of my least favorite drafts of the weekend. It just was. They take Felix Anudike in the first round. I don't really have a problem with this pick. I did have a second round grade on him. To me, he's going to be a really good number 2 edge rusher. I see what they like in him. He fits their system. I think there were more impactful, potential like star players that they could have gone with this 31st pick. I think Felix Anudike-Uzomah is going to be a good Frank Clark replacement for them, and they felt like this was a huge need. I think they maybe took him a little bit early. I don't see the explosive traits from him to turn into maybe what like Myles Murphy was for the Bengals. And for me, if you're in the first round, I think that's what you should be looking for. You get into day 2, Anudike screamed a day 2 edge rusher to me, and they took him in the first, so I can't really give that an A, but I do think he's going to be an impactful player and is going to fill a need for that defense. Now, Rashee Rice in the second round, this was definitely one of my least favorite picks in the draft, and this is another situation where it's really hard because, number one, like I said, Brett Veach knows what he's doing. Number 2 is you now have a receiver that is going in the second round to a team that needs wide receivers who's going to be catching passes from Patrick Mahomes. So Rashee Rice very well might start this year and end up with pretty solid production. But I think you could say that almost assuredly, in my opinion, about Michael Wilson, Cedric Tillman, a couple of receivers that I just think were significantly better prospects than Rashee Rice. The reason this gets a D is, and not an F, is he does have a similar skill set to Juju Smith-Schuster. He's not the most fluid athlete. He's not the fastest guy, but he has decent build-up speed. He's a big-bodied guy and can win tough catches. He can play from the slot and the outside. I think they have a clear-cut role for him. But when I was pushing back on the Rashee Rice hype back in January, this is exactly why, is that I don't see a second-round player here. I see a guy that has some of the worst release off the line of scrimmage that I've ever seen from a college prospect. If you press this guy, he has some, he has the explosive juice, like leaping ability and explosiveness out of his stance, and the strength to eventually learn how to beat press coverage. But you saw it on tape and you saw it at the Senior Bowl. He has no idea how to get off of press coverage. Like, his technique is some of the worst you've seen, and he doesn't have the foot speed to complement him. He's got kind of, stuck in mud type of feet. So he really has to learn how to explode off the ball, and that's not going to be easy for him. I don't think he's not a good route runner. He's not going to be a high-end separator. In an absolute best case scenario, you might get Juju Smith-Schuster here, but I also think he could just be N'Keal Harry, who you're counting on contested catches. And I'm really not a fan of this pick, and I'm going to kind of stand my ground on that one, and I hope I'm wrong. Then they take Wanya Morris at the end of the third round. I think this was good value. This is about where he was supposed to go. He's a guy that is going to be a great backup and a potential starter, which to get basically in the fourth round here at the very end of the third, I think that's a good spot for him. They need tackle, and I think Wanya Morris can compete with Lucas Niang for that right tackle spot. Then you get to the day 3 of the draft, and I actually wasn't a huge fan of these picks either. They take Shamari Connor, a very raw defensive back out of Virginia Tech, a great athlete. So, they're doing, some of these gambles that they've made on day 3 have paid off. And I was wrong about some of these guys in the end of their draft last year, for sure. Guys like Jalen Watson. So I, very well could prove me wrong. Physically speaking, he's basically a clone of what they had in Juan Thornhill. So, maybe that's who he is, but I didn't see the coverage instincts, the ball production. I'm just worried that this was a reach, and there were a large handful of better safeties / dime corners that they could have taken in this situation. I'm fine with the B.J. Thompson pick where they got him, end of the 5th round. I had a 6th round of priority free agent grade, so it's about where he goes. This might as well have been a 6th round pick. But freaky developmental guy who's kind of had some questionable. Let's just face it, he's had some questionable work ethic issues. Going back to his time at Baylor, was kind of dismissed from the team. And I think you look at his frame and say, what aren't you doing in the weight room here? Like, how many days are you skipping of strength and conditioning? Because he's got the frame to be 260 pounds, but he looks like a wide receiver. That's why he ran so well. He's a freaky athlete, and things started to come together for him in his last year at Stephen F. Austin. So if he's kind of matured at 23, 24 years old, becoming kind of that late bloomer, there's a chance that they stole someone with starting traits. So he's an interesting player, but he's got to get to work in the weight room and continue to develop quickly. He's already like 24 years old, so that time is that clock is ticking for him. Then they take Keandre Coburn out of Texas. I think he's going to be a rotational defensive tackle at the back end of their depth chart right away, and eventually could become a kind of starting nose tackle, if you will, a guy that can play 10 snaps a game, anywhere from really 4 to 10 snaps, depending on situation and who you're going against. But short yardage, heavy packages, he's got the size to do it. Just need a little bit more consistency from him in terms of technique. But then you take Nick Jones at the very end of the 7th round. This isn't really going to impact their grade, but to me, if you're going to take a slot corner, why pass on Star Thomas? Like, I know it's way late to nitpick stuff like that, but I didn't see it in Nick Jones. He's not a sensational athlete, but he is a tough player. He's a smart player. They're gambling on him to maybe be a special teamer and a slot corner. But if that's the route you're going to go, dude, just take Star Thomas. His tape is so much better. He's so much more athletic. But anyway, I'm going to give this a C-. I'm totally open to the idea that Brett Veach knows what he's doing, and I'm just completely wrong here. But I don't think they got the best value really down the board. And I don't think they're going to walk out of this class with a whole lot of impact. I think they really just got a low-end, maybe potentially high-end number 2 pass rusher. If they're lucky, Rashee Rice and Wanya Morris will turn into decent starters. But yeah, that's a pretty underwhelming haul for a team that did have a pick in every single round. Then we get to the Raiders. I like their draft a good bit more, but there were some picks that I'm going to critique. So Tyree Wilson in the first. I was surprised that they didn't take Will Levis, and time will tell, him falling to the early 2nd round in a weird draft. Time will tell if teams like the Raiders, the Vikings, the Commanders, the Bucks, if they will regret passing on Will Levis. I thought this would have been a really clean opportunity for him to come in and sit behind Jimmy G, but clearly they feel like Jimmy G is maybe a little bit more than just a typical bridge contract, and they want to kind of go for this with Jimmy G. So if he can stay healthy, I guess we'll find out. I wanted to throw that out there, but I'm still going to give the Tyree Wilson pick an A. When you really look back on this, both Will Anderson and Devon Witherspoon were gone, my 2 blue chip defensive players. And if they didn't want to go with a quarterback here, I think this was the right pick. I don't think Jalen Carter was going to be an option for them, given his off-field issues aren't just a problem, but they are an actual problem in driving situations. Not only is this a bad look for the Raiders organization if they take Jalen Carter, but I just think the environment being in Las Vegas would actually be a horrible spot for Jalen Carter to go, who I think does need to mature and would be drawn to some potentially wrong crowds, given that, he likes to drag race. So I can totally get behind the selection that they made after making the decision that they're not going to draft Will Levis. I think Tyree Wilson is in a really good spot to just do what he does well in year 1. Come in, just go full speed ahead, bull rush, take over the guy in front of you, while also listening to guys like Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, who are complete technicians at the position, and eventually in 2024 is going to overtake Chandler Jones as their number 2 edge rusher. He might do it in year 1 because Chandler Jones was pretty washed up last year. But the thought of Tyree Wilson and Max Crosby as your 1-2 punch, that is a legit dominant pass rush that they can build this defense around. And this idea has really grown on me ever since they made this pick. And then they steal Michael Mayer in the 2nd round. I say steal, but I did have a 1st to a 2nd round grade on him. I do see him as a little bit of a lower upside player, but I see him as a plug-and-play starter right away. He's going to help their run game in a way that the guys that they have on roster really aren't. Austin Hooper and OJ Howard, both guys are just a big pile of meh right now. I think you're getting a top 20 tight end immediately in Michael Mayer. He's just such a complete player, and he's such a good fit with Jimmy Garoppolo, who wants to get the ball out. He's played with his security blanket in George Kittle, or even when he was all the way back in New England, he had Gronk. As far as his thought process, when he gets in trouble, he's going to be able to find Michael Mayer. And for whatever you want to say about Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to be able to rely on him and kind of put the ball in a good spot where it's either yours or nobody's. If it's 3rd and 6 and he gets in trouble, Michael Mayer's going to be there on a stick route or a short hitch or whatever it might be, and they're going to help move the chains quite a bit. And he's going to help them stay ahead of the chains because he's such a good run blocker, and we know they have a good run game with Josh Jacobs. So you got a couple of really nice picks at the top of their draft. And then I think they started reaching a little bit. Byron Young's a good player. I see him as a career role-playing defensive tackle, a true third guy. He doesn't have, to me, like long-term starter traits. And that's why I think it's just a touch early to take him at the top of the 3rd round. Give me, Adebawore over Byron Young every day of the week in the 3rd round. But I do think Byron Young is going to be a very nice piece for that defense as that run defender. He has really good arm length, great gap discipline, good core strength and arm strength to kind of shed and deconstruct blocks. He's not the worst pass rusher you've ever seen either. I think he fits their system up front as someone that can even play a little bit of 5-tech for them like they did at Alabama. So I see the fit. And I think it's a good pick, just nothing super exciting, worthy of an A. And then Trey Tucker at the end of the 3rd round was early for me. I liked Trey Tucker's tape. I think he runs good routes. He's a speedy, deep threat, and I could see him competing in a year or two for a starting job. But I just think there was a lot better players available that they could have gone with. So for me, that is a pretty decent reach that I would critique. We'll see if he proves me wrong, though. And then into day 3, I thought they did a good job. They get Jacorian Bennett at the top of the draft. He's a corner with upside. He's got great speed. I think it's good process to take him. They don't have the best cornerback room. I don't think Jacorian Bennett's going to start. But with good coaching, I think he's not that far off from being a starter. He reminds me a lot of a player that this kind of New England-based staff is going to be familiar with in Jonathan Jones. I think there's a world where he can come in like a Jonathan Jones, be a 4th corner right away, match up in dime packages. And even if he's just that, to get a good matchup corner into the 4th round isn't the worst thing to have. But if, like Jonathan Jones, he can develop into a good number 2 starter in the outside. So I like that pick. They take Aiden O'Connell at the end of the 4th round. It was a touch early for me, but there was this big run on backup quarterbacks in this part of the draft, so I can't really fault it. He's very similar to Jimmy Garoppolo stylistically. I don't think he's as physically talented as Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's saying something because Jimmy is not known for his physical tools. But O'Connell is not an athlete, and he doesn't have the strongest arm, but he had potentially the best processor in this draft, honestly. Pre-snap, post-snap, recognize where he needs to go with the football, and processing coverages and finding those weak spots, getting through his progressions. I really like what you see from there. He can really step in and run a pro-style offense right away. Really aggressive player. He will force balls. He threw more interceptions, I think, than anybody in college football last year. And Jimmy Garoppolo will do that at times too. So if you are going for this idea that, no, we're actually going to kind of try and really compete right now with Jimmy Garoppolo, Aiden O'Connell makes a lot of sense as a backup there if Jimmy goes down for a couple weeks, which is more than possible. I can even understand the thought process of, we'd rather actually have Aiden O'Connell than Tanner McKee, who I think was a better quarterback prospect in terms of upside. But I do think Aiden O'Connell's probably a better player right now than McKee. Then you take Chris Smith in the end of the 5th round. This is remarkable value. I think this was one of the steals of day 3. In fact, I think he's going to compete with Marcus Epps for that starting safety job immediately. He only ran a 4.62 at the combine, which definitely is the reason he falls to the 5th round. It's kind of similar to me of when like Jordan Fuller out of Ohio State fell because of a bad 40 time. But I really think Chris Smith plays faster than that, man. You watch him crash downfield. He triggers and just is a really smart safety, man. He can do any alignment. He can play slot corner, strong safety. I thought his free safety tape was actually the best center fielding free safety tape in the league as far as keeping that easy balance between staying deeper than the deepest, but not staying too deep, right? You watch Lewis Cine at Georgia the year before that. It's like, dude, you don't need to be 35 yards downfield sometimes. Like, Chris Smith had the confidence to come up and be a little bit more aggressive from single high. Now, can he play that at the next level with 4.62 speed? Is the 4.62 speed legit? I don't know. But my pro comp for Chris Smith is Rodney McLeod, who's done all of the things I just described. He's played up and down multiple different defensive schemes throughout the league, and he ran 4.62 at his combine, almost identical size to Chris Smith. So I think you're getting a really smart football player that played great safety in the SEC, and I think is going to have no problem competing with, Marcus Epps for a starting safety job. And you get that at the end of the 5th round. I think this was one of the steals of the draft. They take Amari Burney out of Florida, late 6th round developmental linebacker pick. I didn't really get to his tape because it was late in the process when he became aware to me, and I didn't even really notice him next to a player I really liked in this draft in Ventrell Miller. So he's got speed. He's a run and chase linebacker, and can play special teams while hopefully can grow. That's fine process late in the draft. And then they take Nesta Jade Silvera at the very end of the draft here in the 7th round. I really just, his tape is just so up and down. He's got some athletic tools. He looks the part. There's a lot of splashes on tape. So maybe there's something there. I list him as a developmental guy, but I don't know if I believe in the upside at this point with him. He is an older prospect. I think if you can coach a little bit more consistency into him, then maybe he can be a rotational guy that kind of makes splash plays, rotating in off the bench where he can just kind of bring some fire and some energy. I guess, for a 7th round pick, you could do worse than that. I did have a draftable grade on him. But overall, I like the Raiders draft. I give it a B+. I don't think they got the best value there in the 3rd round, which is where they're going to get dinged a little bit. But you got to love walking out of this draft with Tyree Wilson, Michael Mayer, and then I think stealing Chris Smith. I think you got 3 starters in this draft and some key role players as well. And then we wrap up the AFC West with the LA Chargers draft, and I loved what they did, man. Other than one pick in the 4th round that, if you're looking at the graphic there, Darius Davis, a massive reach in my opinion, but we'll get to that. Quentin Johnston was, I think, hit or miss for a lot of people as far as if people liked this pick. And we've talked so much about the Chargers getting that true speedy deep threat that can really take the top off the defense for Justin Herbert. And while I don't think that is necessarily Quentin Johnston because he doesn't have 4.3 speed, none of these receivers really did at this point, unless you're taking Jalen Hyatt, but that's way too early to take Jalen Hyatt. So to me, I think he's underrated in a few departments. I think as a route runner and his release off the line of scrimmage is truly underrated in this class. You watch his tape, and he can really dot guys up in his routes. He separates on his own. And above that, I think he had an incredible release off the line of scrimmage. If you try to press him, he can stack corners quickly and get into his routes in a hurry. So to me, he's going to separate. I think, honestly, a very close comp for like who he truly is at the next level is kind of like Brandon Ayuk, honestly. I've heard that a lot. And the thing is, like, Brandon Ayuk was 3 inches shorter, so we just talked about him in a different light. We didn't talk about Brandon Ayuk having to come in and be Mike Williams, because you look at Quentin Johnston's height and his weight, and you're like, oh, he needs to go be this big-bodied ball winner on the outside. No, he doesn't need to be that, and for the Chargers, he certainly doesn't need to be that because they have that guy in Mike Williams, right? So he's going to be a different type of receiver. I think he brings separation ability and explosiveness in different areas. And his best asset is as a player after the catch, where he's not just big and strong, but don't let the 3-cone fool you. He didn't run a good 3-cone because his change of direction is poor, but his foot speed is remarkable. And that shows up in his routes, but it especially shows up after the catch, where he's got wiggle, he's got shiftiness, he's got creativity. He made 1 million defenders miss at TCU. So I think you have to kind of do a little bit of mental gymnastics with the type of player he is and look at him as someone that's maybe a little bit more like Brandon Ayuk, or my pro comp for him is Demaryius Thomas, who granted was a little bit faster than Quentin Johnston, but as far as like what he did for the Denver Broncos, like at his best, he was winning on crossing routes, bubble screens. Run after catch is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of Demaryius Thomas. Even though he's a bigger receiver, he wasn't always really this guy that was mossing DBs down the field as this dominant deep threat, right? So that to me is who Quentin Johnston is, and I love how he fits to provide a different flavor for that offense, because they, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams aren't explosive athletes. I do know that Quentin Johnston is an explosive athlete, even if he's not going to be your Deshaun Jackson in this offense. So I give this grade an A. I love the fit. You take Tuli Tuipulotu in the second round, phenomenal value, especially when you look at that huge run of edge rushers. Like I originally had a second round grade on Tuli, so in a vacuum before we saw how this draft played out, I would have loved this fit. But Tuli was like the 13th edge player drafted. I think I had him 10th on my board. Certainly ahead of some of the guys that did get drafted ahead of him, and I also just love the fit, man. He's going to come in and I think can contribute as a rusher right away in the same way that he did at USC as that rush linebacker. They can move him around and create matchups. He's got excellent quickness for a bigger bodied edge guy. But learning behind Khalil Mack how to get a little bit more consistent as a power rusher and in his first step, I think will be good for him. And they're going to probably have to move on from Khalil Mack after this year. And I think Tuli can easily become a number 2 edge rusher for this team opposite of Joey Bosa. So I think in the back half of the second round, that's a great spot for Tuli. And then they steal Diane Henley. Basically everything we said about Drew Sanders for the Broncos. The Chargers got their own third round linebacker steal as well. I had Campbell, Henley, and Sanders all lumped in with kind of the same tier of good linebackers that were all top 50 players in this draft for me. And what's maybe the coolest thing about this is my pro comp for Diane Henley is Eric Kendricks. Size-wise, the fact that he's a willing, instinctive run defender, but never going to be the best guy taking on blocks, but shows excellent zone coverage IQ. He understands how opposing offenses are trying to attack him. He looks around. He covers players, not grass, in zone coverage. They have Eric Kendricks on the roster, and Diane Henley probably isn't going to be a starter right away as a third-round pick, but I can't think of a better mentor and a better spot for him to have to, like I said, like I have said a million times, have to earn the starting job. I really do place value in that, as opposed to just handing these jobs out to these linebackers and letting them coast on public perception and tackle numbers. Like, I think having to truly understand your role in the defense, understand, route combinations, and up the ante as far as how much you have to really put in preparing to play this position that has become maybe the hardest position to play in the NFL. I think this is a perfect situation. I think Diane Henley can reach his high-end comp of Eric Kendricks in this situation. I don't know how you don't love this pick. Then you get to day 3. I do think Darius Davis was a reach. I'm just going to be honest, man. I think if you wanted this gadget player, there were better options. Demario Douglas, for example. I think Tyler Scott, even though I wasn't the biggest Tyler Scott guy, I think he's a much better player than Darius Davis. If you wanted a return man, I think Charlie Jones is a better return man. Darius Davis, I'd like this pick a lot more if he didn't fumble 5 punts in his college career. So, for me, having an explosive return man back there is great, but if you're coughing up the football, it doesn't matter. So to me, I don't see a guy that's going to be a consistent impact on the offense. I don't think he's the deep threat that they're looking for. Like, Tyler Scott could have been that. I think Trey Palmer is another wide receiver that could have been that deep threat. It really just depends kind of what they were looking for here, and I think there were better options in any department, whether it's a gadget player, a return man, a deep threat. Yeah, Darius Davis may have ran fast, but he can't separate deep. He can't accelerate through contact. He is a return man that fumbles punts. So to me, this was a massive reach. I would be stunned if he returns this value back to the Chargers, and I'm pretty disappointed. I mean, they had a lot of real interesting options that could have given them some of that vertical explosiveness as well, right? And they opted not to go that route. So a little bit frustrating for sure. And I think it's fair to be a little bit more critical of a 4th round pick when some of those impactful players are still available. But to get Jordan Davis in the 5th round, to get Jordan McFadden in the 5th round, I love this, man. I don't do comps for offensive linemen, but when I did my O-line podcast on the Fully Inflated Football Show, I was saying he's kind of a hybrid between how I felt about Zach Tom and Jamari Sawyer. And I missed on Jamari Sawyer, kind of. I had a 3rd to a 4th round grade on him. Some people had like 2nd round grades on Jamari Sawyer. Obviously, the Chargers hit on him. And we bring those guys up because they're undersized for the position. Jamari Sawyer, a tackle at 6'2", just like Jordan McFadden. Zach Tom was undersized as well coming out of the ACC. And I think McFadden has the hybrid of those traits. Zach Tom was really athletic but lacked play strength. And Sawyer was kind of a really good technician, but not the most incredible athlete, and a little bit more sturdy, and was 6'2". So to me, Jordan McFadden just feels like one of those 4th, 5th, 6th round steals at the offensive line position who went undrafted because he's shorter. His technique is incredible. It's not an arm length problem for him. He's got 34-inch arms, which is more than good enough for the tackle position. In fact, it helps him get easy leverage. He's a good athlete. He can block any run scheme up front. And he's going to provide them some great flexibility to either be a guard or a tackle. They needed another piece on that offensive line. I really believe that. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan McFadden is starting within the first couple of years for them. And then you get very late in day 3, they take Scott Matlock out of Boise State. I did have a draftable grade on him, just kind of a smooth athlete with some nice get off, some decent pass rush wins on tape. He gives it his all against the run, but the play strength is really lacking. He played, I think, under 300 pounds. I think he got just over 300 for his pro day. So, a developmental guy that I think could become a part of a D-line rotation someday, but tamper expectations for sure. And then Max Duggan, I don't know what they saw in Duggan and Darius Davis. Honestly, I did have a late 7th on Duggan. It's fine, but the deep ball consistency is just so bad. You already have a good athlete as your backup in the Dakota kid that's been there. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but I don't really see it in Max Duggan, but whatever. It's a backup quarterback at the very end of the 7th round. And if anything happened to Herbert, he can run around, make some plays, and, has a chemistry with the 2 receivers you just drafted. That's about as good of a thing I can say about that pick. But overall, gotta love this draft. I wish they maximized that 4th round pick with someone that could have been a legitimate deep threat for them. But other than that, I love the Johnson pick, love the Tui Pelotu pick, and I'm obsessed with the Diane Henley pick. I don't think it's going to really matter too much beyond that, but I think you also got a potential starting offensive lineman in Jordan McFadden. So great job by Tom Telesco. I think really needed a big-time draft, and I think this really keeps the Chargers in the mix in this remarkable AFC. So I really hope you guys enjoyed. Drop your comments down below. What do you think? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Please do hit that like button as well. It really helps me out. We're going to be heading to the NFC West next. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these Draft Grades videos. And we'll see you soon. Peace out.